in a time of memorable events. Those of us who have been following Paul Hines' adventure, bringing to conclusion that of achieving a PhD in choral direction. I was really hoping he would be here today to graduate him, because I finally found definitive proof that it's finished. The University of Maryland graduating class of 2014 on their official t-shirt has the name Conrad Hines III printed. We know him as Paul Hines. The directory lists him as C. Paul Hines. We forget about the third, but it's a day of celebration this week for Paul, and I hope that you take the opportunity to congratulate him. The reason I have this t-shirt, though, is because on the back side is another name that is Elizabeth McWhorter. If they had space to print the full names, it would say Elizabeth Kidd McWhorter, our daughter, and we celebrated her receiving a Master's of Public Management on Friday. And as those occasions go, it spilled over into lunch, and we went out for lunch with her best friend classmate. They were the only two mothers of small children in the class of 176, so they were naturally drawn to each other. And Patty brought along her parents and her sister and their family along with them. And I experienced what is an occupational hazard I live with, which is when you're meeting strange people for the first time, they inevitably ask, "Oh, and what do you do?" Now, this is a question that you don't face because you do other things. You don't have this professional church person label, Christian, Johnny Christian label attached to you. So if you choose to, you can duck the issue. I don't know if you've had the experience where the first thing one of the first things they ask you is, "Oh, tell me, do you go to church? What do you do at church? Are you doing anything like that?" And I find that as I meet people for the first time, there are three kinds of responses. That when I say, "Oh, I'm the pastor of Augustana Lutheran Church in Washington, D.C., or words to that effect, one response is the dropping of the curtains. The dropping of the curtains, and they don't know what to say, and you go through usually an extended moment of silence before they turn and talk to the person on their other side. The second response is, "Oh, well, that's kind of interesting. Tell me more about that." And that's kind of fun. Often it may be somebody who is themselves from some kind of religious background or just is curious about it, and they have something they want to talk about, and it can be quite lively. And the third response is to say, "Oh, really? I'm Lutheran too," or something like that. Or, "I go to church, my church is such and such, what's yours like, what do you do?" And it becomes a lively, animated conversation between believers. I tend to be on the shy side. I don't get in people's face and tell them who I am or what I do until they ask. But some people are very much in your face. In our reading from Acts today, we find Paul, who is somebody who is not shy at all about telling people, engaging people in what they believe. He's just been run out of Thessalonica when we encounter this story, where he went and would go to the synagogues and talk to people who were pious in whatever belief or faith they had, and go to the marketplace and tell people, "Hey, people, pay attention. I have a message for you. I'm talking about the risen Christ. I'm here to tell you about that." And after he got run out, they were so agitated with the message he brought, he went to the next town and he was run out from there. And finally, we find him in Athens, a place where people enjoy entertaining new ideas. They really want to be in the cutting edge, the avant-garde, and they want to hear these strange things. And as the chapter unfolds in Acts chapter 17, it tells us he's going to the synagogues where he is arguing. And he's going to the pious people, the people who believed in whatever faiths were there, and he was kind of depressed in Athens because there were so many different idols and so many different gods that were being worshipped, and he could see the piety of the people with which they approached all of them. And he would go and he would argue with them. He would go to the marketplace. Could you imagine in the mall or in the farmer's market, having somebody come up to you and say, oh, do you have a minute? We get in U Street or around DC, lots of people, do you have a minute to talk about human rights? Do you have a minute to talk about, Paul would be right there with him, do you have a minute that I can tell you about Jesus, the risen Lord? Can I tell you about this? And he was very sophisticated in his argumentation because he was talking with sophisticated people. And so you found that the Stoic philosophers were talking with him, and the Epicureans were talking with him, people, the philosophers, who had different perspectives, different views, a different worldview. Did God create the world? Well, the Epicureans said, well, the gods in the plural did. And the Stoics said, well, yes, God was one of two elements. There was the Word and there was matter, and the convergence of those, and God emanates through all of existence. But Paul is saying, but wait a minute, listen to me. And they found that as they listened to him, he was teaching something new about a God that they didn't know. And so our text picks up when they are taking him to the Areopagus. They're taking him out of the marketplace, out of the synagogue, out of the town to the edge, to a rock formation where the town council, where the court sat, and would judge people, would judge arguments. And in this case, if Paul was speaking about a God who was not registered officially with the town as one to be recognized, he could be in serious trouble. But they take him out there because there's conflict that is occurring with what he's saying. And they say to him, well, who is this God? Who is it that you're talking about? He's strange to us. We don't understand what you're saying. And he recalls to them, he says, he flatters them, I know you're a religious community because you have so many churches, so many monuments, so many memorials, so many indications of your religiosity. I know that's true, but I notice that there's one memorial, the memorial to the unknown God, the God that nobody knows who it is. And I'm here because I'm going to tell you who it is. It's the God who created everything. It's the God who at the very beginning created the world and everything in it. He who is Lord of heaven and earth does not live in shrines by human hands made as though he needed anything. This is a God that doesn't depend on you to build a house or to do anything for him. This God is independent since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. God is the source of all these things. And God created the boundaries from one ancestor. He created the boundaries of life and of time, of the places in which we live. God does all of these things. And your purpose is something totally different. Your purpose is simply that you should search for God, that you should grope and feel your way to find God, that you should find God. That's your mission, your purpose. And you can do this with confidence because he is indeed not far from each one of us. God is present in our lives. So this idea that the way you go about acquiring a connection with God is by seeking and by feeling your way along. What gets here translated as groping is simply feeling your way along and ultimately finding one who is already very, very, very close to you. Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and he says all these things. And he reminds us in a way that resonates with what the gospel said today, where Jesus says to us, you know, God is close. You know him because he abides with you and he will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live. I live because I live, you also will live. And Paul, picking up or continuing with that thread, says, because of all this, in him we live, we move, we are, We have our existence, our very existence in him. We come alive when we search, when we feel our way along and find all of a sudden we live. There's a sense of life and movement in our lives, and a sense that we truly are. We truly exist. We're vibrant human beings. And when you know that, when you recognize that, since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or a stone. I was tempted to think about this in terms of some of the scientific debates that go on, and in particular a biography I was listening to of Joseph, the fellow who discovered oxygen and others, some 10 elements. And he was controversial because he didn't follow the rules. He didn't follow the collect the information, assemble your data, put it together with an elaborate theory, put it together. He was an intuitive scientist. It's in intuiting all this stuff that it's not in breaking down the elements of gold and silver or of analyzing a stone. No, while God is not formed by the art of imagination of mortals, God has overlooked the times that of our own ignorance, Paul says to the crowd. Now he commands all people everywhere to have a transformation, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. And that is the controversial point. When he says you can be assured that in your searching, your groping, in your finding, in your sense of coming alive and moving and being, that you receive this assurance that experience is one that continues well beyond the boundaries of life, of this life, into a life that goes on and on. That it's in that experience that we find that God is with us, providing the comforter, the advocate, the paraclete, in the words of Jesus. He has given assurance to all by rising and raising the dead. And out of that statement, around the dinner conversations that night, there were 3 responses. There were the folks who ridiculed him. The curtains went down, the eyes were shut, the minds were closed, and they turned away and talked to other people. There were, as you read the conclusion of the chapter, people who said, "Tell me more, I want to know more, let's keep talking, I'm interested." And there were those who believed what he said, who genuinely believed. I was thinking about this in the awkwardness of the situations we all encounter when we are pushed out of our darkened closets, our secret places, and have to own up to what we believe and what our faith is, that we're people of faith, that we're people that put our trust in God. And as that awkwardness is worked through, as the shutters go down, or let's keep talking comes back, or the friendly conversation of people of faith comes together, I'm reminded that regardless of that response, regardless of what the reply is, and Lord knows those replies have been coming now for 2,000 years and more, that the overriding message that we hear today is that we're not alone. That it's as we find God present with us, that presence continues us as we seek it, we find it, as we find it, we experience it, as we experience it, we come alive, as we live it, we move around, and we experience a vibrancy in life that can overlook and overcome so many things, everything. And it's in that experience that going out and meeting strangers and saying, "This is who I am, this is how I live," it's knowing that God is with me all the time. And that doesn't change. That I hear this gospel message, I am with you, I will never orphan you, I will never leave you alone, regardless. And for that I say, thanks be